Okay, hello everybody. Hope you are well. I'm just going to set up my screens and make sure we're kind of good to go for this evening. Thank you very much for everyone for joining me. First of all, I hope that my setup, my mic is all good and everyone can hear me. That's the first thing to check. I'm just going to have a quick look onto the actual page itself so that I can keep things in check. And we should be then live. Yes, okay. Looks like we're good. So first thing, thank you very much everyone for joining me this evening. I'm going to get started dead on 7:30, which is obviously when we're kicking on live. Can see all the comments and all of the actions. The thing is, for me personally, it's the first time going on a Facebook Live to Camera World. So thank you very much, Camera World, for obviously hosting the actual experience itself. And thank you very much to Click Trip for also giving us the opportunity to do this over the next, it's not just myself, there's been actually groups of photographers that have been doing this. So I'm glad you can all hear me. Thank you very much for joining. And tonight we're going to be talking very much, let me get my full size screen on so you can see what I'm doing. But tonight we're going to be talking very much about the architectural gems of Georgia. Now, it's not a country heard of very often. In fact, I've had a very funny incident here since I've been back in the UK. I'm actually coming from Norwich tonight. I've been back here for about a month for family reasons. But basically, one of the reasons why I decided to do a talk exactly on Georgia is because one of the reasons is that people don't seem to get or understand, I suppose, beauty that's out there other than what we're told in kind of our press and our local world. And I know other photographers have done some amazing talks on areas such as this. And Georgia, before we talk about Georgia, is one of those places that has got a lot to offer. And I think, having been based there, I'm normally have an apartment there in Tbilisi. Is where I'm kind of based out of at the moment. As you're going to see in this talk this evening, there's actually plenty of stuff in Georgia for a photographer and from a photographer's standpoint as well. So, yeah, so first of all, a bit about myself and a bit about me. Very briefly, so I obviously grew up in Norwich, hence why I'm back here at the moment. And I spent the last 7 or 8 years actually photographing inside forgotten, abandoned, hidden architectural spaces, relics, hidden interiors, I suppose, around city centres. Not everything that has to be abandoned, but something that's got that aesthetic that us photographers love to shoot, that maybe some decay, maybe the colours, the paint, and that kind of stuff. So that's a little bit about me. I've been only taking photos and photography seriously since 2010, after a period of travel that got me inspired. So the thing is, for me, I'm kind of very much a guy who loves his travel. I mean, and I'm talking like I've been all over the place traveling, and you'll see from my portfolio that it takes a huge part in my image making and stuff that I've done. I've always been fascinated by the different cultures, the foods, the textures and the colors. I suppose it's kind of what draws me is initially that travel side, and then the photography kind of follows suit. Since January, like I mentioned in here, since January 2019, I've actually been on the road full time officially. We left in January 2019 to travel to sort of like nomadically. The idea actually originally was to be based in cheaper destinations for a longer period of time to really get to grips with the country, and that's where Georgia sort of gets there, comes into play. Before we talk a bit about the actual Georgia and the country itself, I just need to briefly talk a bit about photography and I suppose the shooting side. For me, I do shoot a rich color palette. It's kind of something personal to me. I love colors. I love trying to bring the best of colors out of the architecture and making sure that people can see kind of, I suppose, everything that there is within the space and try to bring that to your screens. And I do use, any architecture photographer does have to use kind of different methods to blend images together to get the best out of their work. So I do have to put that forward quite early on. And the reason for that is because the camera just in a dark environment, if you can imagine in a dark space and a dark environment, it's quite difficult actually to, for everybody to see what's going on. The dynamic range of the cameras is just unfortunately isn't enough always. Sometimes it just depends on the location and the shot we're talking about. So, but now I've got that out of the way, we'll start talking about Georgia as a whole. Now, for me personally, Georgia didn't come onto my radar actually until a little bit later on in my journey. Now, first of all, people are going to say, well, where is Georgia? So we're not talking about Georgia, USA. We're talking actually about Georgia. If you think of Turkey, above that is the Black Sea. To the right of that is Georgia, underneath Russia, above Armenia and Azerbaijan. So probably in the news recently in the UK, you would have heard about the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. It's just above that section. And it's a beautiful country, sandwiched between that Black Sea, the Caucasus Mountains, and the southern Caucasus Mountains in the bottom of the valley there. Tbilisi, the capital, Batumi, the second biggest city, and there is two de facto or kind of like areas within Georgia that are kind of unusual and difficult to kind of to access, let's call it. Now, beautiful city of Tbilisi is the capital. This is actually where I currently rent and is actually my home at the moment. Once the pandemic came and everything happened, we've actually chose to be based out of there on a longer term scenario. Beautiful city. I'll talk a bit more about Tbilisi later on. Georgia not just has this kind of wow factor city with these kind of, I suppose, these unusual architectural gems either side of the river. It has a lot of hidden architecture, a lot of hidden beauty within it. Georgia as a whole also has kind of like some unusual places that you would think of. For instance, this is Batumi. Batumi is on the second biggest city. This was just after Christmas, January of this year. I shot this with my drone, getting some lovely snow on the beach there. This city was kind of known as the Vegas of the Black Sea at one point. High rises cropping up, some unusual architecture. That sky rise that you see there actually has got a Ferris wheel on the other side of it, which is quite a funny story actually. It's supposed to be the technical university building for advanced architectural movement. And it's really quite funny. It's like a technical university, and it's quite funny because it's actually closed and it will never open due to technical challenges with that Ferris wheel. So quite the funny story. You can understand it's kind of unusual for a place. People don't think of this kind of architecture sitting in a country like Georgia, of course, former USSR country. What actually drew me to the country originally was stuff to do with like the kind of heritage architecture, the kind of stuff that's buried within the country, stuff that's maybe lesser known and very heritage medieval stuff as well. There's a lot of churches, chapels. Being an Orthodox country is something that crops up a lot. And in most photos, the kind of photography that I suppose you see on stock sites, a lot of these kind of churches, chapels would pop up quite a lot because of being an Orthodox country. It makes sense. Don't be fooled though, they're always within absolute stunning landscapes. Now in the north, in the Caucasus area, you've got a lot of these kind of little small fort towns, fort areas, and they're actually beautiful because they've got all these kind of little towers like poking out. This is the Svaneti region. Then in the other side, on the western side, the Chicheti region, you've got all of these little forts. They're kind of like to stop invaders from years gone by. So this is kind of giving you an introduction, I suppose, to Georgia as a whole. Also, in the west side, you've got these kind of where the mountains meet the sea, just above that Batumi city that I mentioned earlier. You get a lot of cloud inversions. So if you get up high in the summer, in those summer months, you do get a lot of cloud inversion. You can be up and above the clouds and get some beautiful shots and drone stuff as well. But people also don't understand that it's a very varied landscape. In the south, below Tbilisi, on the eastern side, you do have a semi-desert as well. So this kind of one here reminds me of kind of like the one you'd get in Peru. That kind of rainbow mountains, that kind of vibes to it. The shoulder seasons, spring and autumn, lead to beautiful light. This was in the spring of last year, late spring of last year. Tried out with the 4x4, got out, and would you believe this is the light that we witnessed literally in front of our eyes. So this is just shot with a 20, I think a 200 to 400 or 100 to 400 lens, compressing the scene a bit, but the light, you can kind of understand what happens. Those kind of seasons, you don't always get the clouds maybe, but you do get this lovely soft light kind of later on in the evenings, which holds itself well, of course, to architecture, as we're going to talk about in a moment. Soviet cars trotted. As soon as you can leave Tbilisi, you'll always see these Soviet bangers running around the country. say bangers, they're still in use actually, quite so, quite a lot. Bathtub on top, that kind of thing. Kutaisi, places like Kutaisi and Zugdidi in the west, you're always going to see these kind of Soviet vehicles. Beautiful when you spot one, and it always leads to the excitement. No more so though than say like an empty petrol station with the cows or the pigs running out in front of the road and kind of keeping you alert. So there's lots of things, I suppose, to point a camera at around the country. Now, my love affair me and Georgia, I suppose, combined together. First of all, it popped up onto my radar in 2017. Now, I was researching to try and do a project there in Abkhazia, one of those de facto regions that I mentioned earlier. And finally, I was also looking to try to do a project and find out what was there. Now, bearing in mind that I shoot mostly interiors, for me personally, the first town that I came across was the town of Skaltobol. Now, Skaltobol, in its heyday, was one of the Soviet Union's flagship spa resorts. Now, famous for its sort of mineral springs and water therapy treatments, I suppose. The development of the sanatorium started in the mid-20s, and by the 1980s, it was flourishing under that Soviet or former Soviet regime. The Skaltobol Health Complex consists actually of 21 impressive sanatoriums, and these sanatoriums and 9 bathhouses that encircle a large central park are now actually disused and abandoned after the collapse and the fall of the Soviet Union. So I actually came across one building in 2017 while doing research online, and that particular building led me to just wanting to go there for a few days. I booked myself into an Airbnb, and me and 3 friends actually trotted around the town for that full 4 days, and not realizing that we probably should have taken out a car hire, but walked around for the whole 4 days, and lo and behold, building after building, we discovered so many architectural gems and beautiful interiors. Now, in its heyday, kind of 4 trains would arrive, actually 4 to 8 trains would arrive a day from Moscow, sort of giving people the right to rest. There was even a bathhouse built here for Joseph Stalin, and it's a place where the Soviet elite would wine and dine. This is a former dining room in one of the large Soviet sanatoriums. In the 1990s, when the Soviet Union collapsed, soon afterwards, the spa town became abandoned, and the once grand structures were left empty to crumble into decay. The thing is, in 1992, 1993, a war broke out in the very, very west of Georgia. Now, if you look on the map, like I showed you earlier, you will see like a dotted line on that map on the west side, and that's actually Abkhazia. Now, when this war kicked off, refugees fled the war, as you would, and 200,000 ethnic Georgians fled from the conflict, and some 8,000 refugees took temporary shelter in Skaltobol and inside these vacant sanatoriums. So during my first visit, actually in 2018, so it was March 2018, I would walk around this town not knowing whether the place was totally abandoned, whether half it was lived in, whether some people were actually going to reside in there or not. And it turned out that actually around about half of those people, about 4,000, were still residing in some of the buildings throughout the town. Things have changed since, as I'm going to talk about in a second, but 25 years later, I suppose at that point it was nearly 30 years later actually, after this war, it's incredible that people were still living and residing in parts of these buildings. For the first 15 years, they actually didn't have water, they didn't have power, and they kind of stripped parts of the sanatoriums to live in and kind of reside in. This is one where you've got this courtyard, and above here in those kind of windows that you see at the top, those ones there were actually lived in on my first visit. Now, when I returned back 6 months later, this town was becoming quite popular with photographers and off the beaten path explorers and people doing travel blogs and stuff like this. And I was one of the 5 or 6 photographers who actually published a series on this town. And that led to quite the upturn and fortunes of the buildings and also the residents that were left behind. Turn to 2021, and we now have basically apartments that have been built for the residents. People have started moving into there, and people have started kind of getting away from any of the sanatoriums that were left behind. So kind of unusual town, but this was the hotbed for me. It turned out to be the town that would be the sort of start of a whole bigger project and something new that I never realized in March 2018 that I was going to be doing. And it's an interesting story because when I first, when I never thought that Skald Harbour would be a place that I would visit time and time again, but I ended up visiting, would you believe, over 40 times over 2019. It got such a popular place to visit because of this unusual architecture, because of these sanatoriums, that the local Georgians started shooting weddings there. A tourism office was set up for people to come to and visit the town, and also just to kind of show people around. And I ended up being one of the go-to photographers for the tourism board to actually show people around the town and kind of go through it in 2019 when I eventually got back there. We've had a question come through about shooting interiors and lenses and kit. I'm going to talk about the gear as a whole and what gear I use in the final section tonight. The reason why I've chosen to do that is because I wanted to dive straight into Georgia as a whole. There's lots to cover, and I want to make sure that obviously the interiors and the shooting side is covered towards the end, and that leads to obviously a lot more questions. Back to Skald Harbour. Now, the thing with Skald Harbour is, like I said, in them early days, 2018, I never knew I'd go back. And when I did go back, this tourism office being set up was amazing, because what had happened is it led me a contact and a connection. In between my first and second visit, I was made redundant and decided to become full-time photographer. And not just that, I decided to progress with kind of everything that I was doing with Georgia. Went back, met the tourism office, and lo and behold, these kind of press releases were taking shape all over the town, about the town, and some of the buildings were being kind of rescued and saved and converted. Some of them were being kind of like protected, I suppose, as well, which was a really nice way to look at things. Now, the first one that I ever actually came across was the one on the left here. I actually found that, would you believe, via TripAdvisor, a little article on TripAdvisor, and spotted that photo. And that's when I went to the town, did the 4 days, and walking around on foot. Now, these kind of spaces are challenging to shoot. And the thing is, people look at them and always think, wow, it's just architecture, it's easy to shoot. It's actually never the case. Depends on times. It's the same as any form of photography, getting in at the right time of day, trying to think about your compositions, trying to work through, just actually looking at the shot and trying to think what would work, what wouldn't. You're seeing a lot of kind of one-point perspectives, what we call one-point perspectives, where you're looking through the architecture. And it's because we're doing an architecture talk, and you want to make sure I'm showing you, the viewer, kind of, the actual shape and size and the view overall, sort of aesthetic of the building. Now, all over this town, there is some beautiful staircases. It's probably the highlight, I suppose. Zigzags, they're crossing through them. You can shoot kind of across them to give it this kind of impression that you've got this zigzag or whirling effect. Now, that's something I'm always on the lookout to do these days. I always try to go to these spots, and I always try to make sure that I'm shooting probably the traditional straight on one-point perspective, and then 2 or 3 something different. Whenever I go to a new location, it's kind of something I look to do, nail the kind of first shots and then get some other secondary shots after this. This is the go-to shot. I suppose this is the killing shot of Skald Harbour. You can now see why it's popular with brides and grooms popping there and taking their photographer with them. And over the last 3 years, that has absolutely blossomed into, being a place where you can imagine at the end there, the bride and groom having a romantic kiss. And the thing is, I've visited this location probably 30 or 40 times, like I said, at this point. But to get the sun in that position, you do need to go at the right time of day. So for me, I visited it and eventually realized that in autumn, at sunrise, it rises just in between those 2 pillars there, and you can shoot it straight on and get the light coming towards, or the shadows, should I say, the light and the shadows coming towards the lens of your camera, which is a really nice way of looking at things. So it happens for a couple of months, it rises in this location. Obviously a month or so later, it's right in the middle of the columns itself. So depending on kind of the time of year, this is something that we look to do. Now, once we leave Skald Harbour, so this is an unusual start to Georgia. Of course, I'm not a traditional photographer, I don't suppose, and most people would start with the capital city. But usually, for me and my photography and what I do, shooting capital cities is actually quite difficult, because usually it's a high turnover of land. It's difficult to kind of get to grips with in terms of, buildings turnover. It's hard to find unique locations. and things like this. So it's very difficult for me to go to a capital usually and pick up photography gems straight away. Anne's asked a question as well about if I run tours to Georgia. The whole reason really about why I went to Georgia in the initial instance was actually to set up a photography tour business. So it's a place where is now I'm going to be based out of for a period of time, probably the next 2 or 3 years at this rate, and base myself out of there, really get to grips with the country as I've been doing over the last couple of years, and running out of there. Also pushing myself into that region as a whole, Armenia and Lebanon and other countries. But in terms of Georgia as a whole, yes, that is something that I'm looking to do. And I've been doing that now since 2018, late 2018, running tours there. So as you'll see later in the slides, there is lots more about kind of that actions as well. So Tbilisi, moving on to the capital city. I mentioned that it's difficult to kind of get to grips with a city, difficult to understand kind of the lay of the land. One of the top tips I can give people is actually you look at where free walking tours take place in kind of, TripAdvisor. If you look on Airbnb, a place where you'll find me in Georgia, you'll also find, like, if you're looking for like an avenue, look on like an Airbnb and you'll see free walking tours. And this is what I did. I went to Airbnb, I looked for these free walking tours and understand then where they take place, whereabouts within the city people walk through, because those walking tours usually take place in the old towns or the heritage part of the city. And what I simply did is I then took my camera, walked around those parts of the city to try to get to grips with kind of everything that was within my new city, my new home. All of these on the screen, none of them are abandoned, despite their look and feel, I suppose. The one on the left is actually an apartment block based in the east side of the city, in kind of like buried within the area that was kind of built by the Germans in the turn of the 19th century. And this particular apartment is 5 or 6 apartment blocks in there, warm, welcoming people. It's the only place in Europe that someone's offered me a cup of tea while I've been taking my photography. So it works really, really well. It's a beautiful aesthetic. The one in the center is actually a courtyard. Now, all over the capital of Tbilisi, you get around about somewhere in the region of around about 30 to 40 of these old courtyards. And they're absolutely fantastic to walk through, to kind of point your camera at, to see kind of like little cats running around, families of cats, speak to the local families. The traditional language, of course, normally they speak Russian. Anyone under 40 would speak English. Anyone over 40 is Russian and Georgian. Georgian language is incredibly difficult. 33 letters in their alphabet, or syllables, or symbols, should I say, in their alphabet. But they're great. They're friendly. They're so helpful. And they'll always point you in the, if you go to one courtyard, go to photograph it, they'll always point at another one for you to go and check out as well. So these courtyards are fantastic. And believe it or not, someone does still live in both the top and the bottom apartment on that photo. The one on the right hand side is simply just a front door of somewhere in the old town. Now, the old town is a place where it took me months and months to get to grips with, just to really understand the lay of the land, where the roads are. Now I really know Tbilisi very, very well, but in the initial stages, it was very difficult. Now, looking for I suppose what I was looking for was that same aesthetic of decay and beauty, but within the hidden world, within the city of Tbilisi, within the cities that I was going to, I wanted to make sure that I was kind of picking out these kind of gems. And this apartment block that I showed you a minute ago, this is shooting down it. Very difficult, actually challenging shot. We'll talk about the challenges of shooting this stuff a little bit later. But the gem, the crown jewel, was the Grand Hotel London. So this is the former Hotel London in Tbilisi. Again, it's right in the centre, actually, just off of the main tourist road to Rustafeli Avenue. And this, again, is an apartment block full of Airbnbs to rent. In fact, if you go on Airbnb and went into Tbilisi, you'll find this one crop up very, very frequently. It's a beautiful staircase, one that I photographed on many occasions. And another tip that I can give anyone is, if you're looking to get into gallery work, which is quite obviously where I make most of my income from, is if you try to shoot places like this, or shoot places that are local to a gallery, then it's worth trying to talk to them afterwards and get your work seen in that way. Because for me, that's how I did that with these 2 images. And it's been quite a successful avenue for me, because Tbilisi not having many photography galleries, not just that, you've got this kind of aesthetic right on the doorstep of the gallery. and they knew more about this location than I could ever dream of telling you tonight. So it was kind of, you know, the history that they placed underneath that photo. It is magical because it kind of gives, it helps sell that image, and of course that gives them that connection. They really wanted to be involved in selling this piece of work. So great location. The one on the left was, of course, the downstairs entrance to it, and the one upstairs is kind of shooting across. And just before the renovation started, I believe they're going to do some sort of roof repairs in the next couple of months to this location, which thankfully is going to stop again, you know, any more water damage. Now back to that old town that I mentioned a minute ago. The old town being brilliant, really. Actually, I love the old town. Walking around there is beautiful. But one of the other things that happens in Tbilisi in the old town is you get all of these balconies, these wooden structures that are sometimes falling into the road. Sometimes they're kind of leaning into pathways. You have to dodge them, you know. But this particular one is amazing. It's actually just part of an art gallery, and it kind of shows that aesthetic off because kind of they've polished the stained glass, but the original wood, the original kind of stairs up to this art gallery is this here. So it's quite famous actually now for Instagrammers to go to, because in some times of the day, golden hour for instance, or bright sunlight, the sun comes through and leaves this kind of rainbow pattern on the floor. I don't tend to look to try and shoot that obvious shot, so going in on an overcast day gave me much more of a natural shot of the location. But this is kind of the entrance stairwell. Really difficult one to shoot. It's kind of as you come up here on the stairs, the balcony then bends back round towards the camera's position, so it's difficult to get an angle on. But I suppose pushing it towards the left here, it kind of gives that aesthetic right through, and you can kind of see all of the details. One of the tricks I always used to do to try and pick out locations was go on Google Maps, see something that was permanently closed, you know, do some research, work out whether that location was interesting, whether it was kind of something I wanted to photograph. And the one on the left is a cinema, again on the east side of Tbilisi. And with this one, I went down there, saw permanently closed on Google Maps, and I went down there and saw a little sign outside that said, you know, the email address and phone number of the guy who was kind of in charge of the building. And it was due to be kind of repurposed into an art space, like an event centre. And this was before COVID, so it was kind of like something that obviously they were looking to do to try to make that space kind of more a creative space. This is actually the entrance to a cinema, so built in 1905, I believe, very old cinema, and anything in the kind of arts world in the Soviet times, sort of survived through the Soviet times, I suppose, has lasted through until these days, because they love that world, they love that art space. So this particular one here, once I made contact with them, it gave me a permanent place to go to take guests to shoot through, you know, and this is the entrance to that hall. The one on the right hand side is actually a cable car station. Now, the sorry side of the story here is occasionally you do get kind of spaces that get overrun and they get overshared. They've got that wow factor, and that does tend to happen more with abandoned buildings, of course. And one of the reasons why I started trying to mix up the types of locations I was going to, not just making it always abandoned, was that exact reason. With the abandoned buildings, they do tend to decline once the word spreads. And this one here, this cable car station in bottom of Mutsminda Hill in the centre of the city, is now completely filled with graffiti. It's completely trashed. It's smashed up. Its windows are broken. You can walk in there and it's still worth a visit. But in terms of like to see what the space could have been like, unfortunately, this is something that I always have to bear in mind. Is I try to get to these locations fairly quickly, but the abandoned ones, unfortunately, in some areas of the world do get turned over and end up in that way, which is a real sorry state of affairs. Now, this is probably the crown jewel of the capital city. Now, it's the basis of everything that I did in Georgia in 2018 and 19, and that was looking for places where I could maybe set up like a walking tour, maybe set up the week-long trips and go to this place and get away from the hustle and bustle of the city, take people into it, show them the beauty that's hidden behind closed doors, and have a place where we can talk photography, talk settings, talk gear, whatever it is. This is where the Erosoni Dance Company Theatre basically used to perform, train and practice. Now, the Erosoni are a traditional Georgian dance company, and they're based in this building. They train youngsters, and they also train kind of like the up and coming dancers. Now it's a very, very well paid job for Georgia. I'm talking like the average salary in Tbilisi is around about, for a very good job, $600 a month. For like a hospital nurse would be 400, a teacher would be like $350, $400 a month. So you can kind of see the average wages. A dancer would be on the higher end of this, 500 a month, to travel the world, to perform on the stage, that kind of thing. And this is their academy centre. But you wouldn't think, well, why would they be performing in here? This is just part of their building. So like 2 rooms are disused and turned off, I suppose, from the outside world. So going in here, eventually making a contact with the owner. I found it on like a blog. I went down there. I spoke to the owner of the dance company and arranged to eventually go back there to kind of, come in, pay some monies as I got guests, pay some monies towards the upkeep or window repairs or his time, wages, this kind of thing, and to go into a place that was away from the hustle and bustle of the city. And like I said a minute ago, talk kind of like photography, I suppose, within this space. I actually had a friend of mine, Goga, who actually helped me arrange all of this. A Georgian guy who speaks great English, a great friend of mine. He lives in Tbilisi, and he'd been there his whole life, living in that city, and he'd never know this building exists. It's actually the former Officers Club originally, a place where kind of, they would sit in here, have VIP dinners, and then wait for kind of performances to take place next door in the theatre. So it's kind of like a VIP, upstairs you'd have VIPs, in the bottom section you'd have lesser VIPs, I suppose, waiting for those performances. In the next one, relics and ruins. They don't crop up in capital cities very much either. Now, this is actually a former Armenian church. There is a few Armenian churches around the kind of, around the country as a whole, as you're going to see in a minute. And I try to uncover the best of those because sometimes they make for interesting shots. This one, there's a car park and the roof collapsed years and years ago of the church, and it just made a mound of rubble, I suppose. And at the end of this car park, you can kind of walk onto the mound and wait for the sun to drop, and you can shoot into the sort of the hole, as it were, of the church. And this is the shot that it makes. And every time I go back in, in autumn, the colours and the leaves here, they grow, they get higher and higher. The leaves are getting higher, so it's going to get a better shot over time. So it's always worth popping back to a location and reshooting it at a later date. And that's something that I always look to do. What about the hidden gems? So we're going to move a bit away from the capital city, and there's a reason for that. When I was trying to pull together a map of like locations to get to grips with this country of Georgia, this lovely country, beautiful country of Georgia, one of the pulls for me, photography wise, was always going to be looking for places that were really off the beaten path that people don't know about. Things that are really cool to point your camera at and go, that's interesting. Chiachora is one of those locations. Now, Chiachora, the city of Chiachora was founded it's basically among steep valleys and deep gorges. And thanks to basically a vein of like the manganese, is basically like a mineral, that they sort of mine for. It's like ripe for mining in that area. So the manganese basically is kind of like the pull, or it was the pull. The terrain was difficult for mine workers to traverse on foot. So they basically installed, during the Soviet times, this kind of network of dangling cable cars that, up until 2019, was still in use. Kind of up until 2019, they were still in use. In 2019, I actually had guests that travelled on them, and they voted this as their best experience of the whole trip, which is quite unusual because you would think, are they safe? Are they dangerous? Well, they have now been pulled out of use, so we've taken that decision away from the person, but they're still in use in terms of the lines are still there, the cable cars are still hanging, and there's 12 of these lines. Now, like I said, founded in the kind of 1800s, Chiachora quickly became kind of a popular source for this manganese and the iron that was being taken from the mountains in the area. And the problem was, as workers was traveling from their communities, from their towns, from their villages, and these were up in hilly gorges, and they kind of had to get into these cable cars, and they made these cable cars to go into a central station, and then they would change trams and then go up to the mine. So they would basically almost become a way of crossing from across the dangerous valley, crisscross through tunnels or over the other cable car systems, and they would put them into kind of like the mine system. They'd work there for the day, and then they would return back. And they were installed in 54, so 1954, by Stalin and his government. And of course, Stalin was born in Georgia. So for this reason, I believe these cable cars, although they were used all the way up until 2019, there is a new system now being installed. I believe that and they are already pulling the cable cars out of the stations, and they're putting them into a position where you can always go and view them, you can always go and walk around, you can take point cameras at them, and the aesthetic of them is stunning, really. This is a shot from 2019, the kids traveling up them. So you see going back home, you're going back home and traveling back up. So the old stations were magnificent, actually, to go around to look in. And there's 24 stations dotted around the town, but 12 kind of lines, if that makes sense. So they are all still there. And when they stop working, I then had to get into my car and go around and work out, actually, with difficulty of not using very clever Google Maps, to go around, work out where the roads were first of all, and then try and get there on wheel, so that I could go and repin them on my map and photograph them and take people to them. Now they all hang in sort of situ like this, so you've got kind of like this kind of cable cars sitting remotely, away from kind of prying eyes, I suppose, no graffiti, that kind of thing. This particular one is unusual. It's sitting right outside one of the mines. I've got really friendly with the caretaker that kind of looks after this, stops it getting graffiti, stops it getting ruined. I love the colours of them. I always love these little tin hut kind of cable cars. You can see the sort of deterioration, the condition they were in when they were paused. It's a German company now installing kind of like a new system. So I believe that the new system is due to go live any minute, I think, while I'm over here. The main cable car, the big line, actually flows across a river. And I went on this twice in 2018 and 19. An amazing car. Used to have a little driver with a wheel. She actually used to do the wheel, do the bells, signal that she was coming up. It's a fantastic experience, and one that I believe that they're going to try and get this line back up and running next year, to be that kind of like part of the museum, and to show people kind of what Chiatura once was. And I suppose it would be that draw and that pull to off the beaten path type travelers and photographers. It's a very unique travel experience, definitely. And that's a closer shot of kind of what the car looks like hanging over that ravine there. So you kind of get the experience, get the understanding of what it would look like. Now, when I go to a country for the first time ever, wherever I go, I've just done a project in Lebanon, for instance, and what I try to do is, when I go to a new country like Georgia, when I went there for the first time, is I try to pinpoint architecture that's unique to that region or that area. And for Georgia, there is one particular piece of architecture that comes up time and time again, and it's not just Georgian specifically. It can actually be anything in the former Soviet Union, and that is the culture house. Now, the culture house essentially, like I said, popped up in Armenia, Azerbaijan, Ukraine, Russia, any former Soviet country. And in Georgia, there is some magnificent examples of the former culture houses. The best examples in Georgia tend to be on the side of like buildings in use, so schools, or maybe they use the front area and they let people into it. And these are basically places where, in the Soviet times, due to a lack of funding, they've obviously closed over the years, but in the Soviet times, they would be places full of propaganda, no doubt, on the crossroads of every town and village and some cities, and people would go to them. They would watch theatre, they would watch cinema, performances, they would drink a glass of wine. We'll talk about the wine in a moment, but Georgia being a wine country, the glass of wine would definitely take place quite a lot. And they would go there, they would, convene at the end, the crossroads of the town or the village. They'd meet their friends, they would come and watch these performances. And it was kind of really like celebrated within the Soviet Union that people would come, they would perform on these stages, and they'd put on a proper show. In the Soviet times, it's kind of not believed or not known about much that they actually really aspired to look, and they looked at Italy, the Parises, and all those elaborate performances, and they tried to recreate a bit of that for themselves, but of course with this propaganda attached. Now, these culture houses actually, for me personally, it was really difficult. In most places, some have been saved, especially in capital cities. But there's an ongoing struggle, I suppose, to draw attention, and it tends to be only the local press that cares about kind of, maybe one individual culture house or place where locals live, and it's a tiny village, a town, that kind of thing. And for me, I was always going through it and thinking, well, how am I going to find the best examples of these culture houses? And it took me months and months and months. Eventually, I realised that a lot of the ones that were in wreck and ruin, they're left, they're abandoned, so of course they become very, very defunct. After a while, I got to grips with it and realised that it's best to go to ones that are on the side of these kind of buildings in use, because they have a little bit more protection. I can go to them, I can talk to landowners, I can talk to building owners, or maybe the local municipality, and speak to them and say, look, can I come in here, take some photos? Or also, can I come in here with a group? And that is the case as time's gone on. It's ended up being a great way for me to progress and sort of show that actually giving something back to these local communities is quite nice. It's very difficult for them to raise funding in some of these local towns, villages. My main aim has always been to try and promote through my trips and tours, to be able to go there, to be able to, donate money, to be able to give money through for us attending, visiting, for the upkeep somehow of the building. And even if it's just, a bit of wood, for instance, in some of these types of places can be quite cheap. And if it's just a railing, a banister, or just putting a board over a window to protect it and keep the birds out, even if that's as much as we're doing, then I'm pretty happy. It's going to be quite a lot to save, of course, some of these spaces, but even doing small things to slow the progress of the decay, then that would be brilliant. Believe it or not, this one here is still in use. This is actually a local council building, a local municipality building, and that's right next door to another gem, the one here on the left. Now, this one I actually found via a Facebook group. I actually came out of the pink stairs. I took a photo of the outside of another village hall that was right beside it. Magic, I thought that looks awesome. I could see, I was standing here on the right outside those windows, and I looked in and I could see the ceiling. I thought that looks actually awesome. So I took a phone shot of the outside of this building, and I basically went onto a heritage Facebook group in Georgian, and I put it in English, Russian and Georgian, and said, does anyone know this building? This is the town it's in. Does anyone know the owner, the key holder, anything like this? And lo and behold, a woman replied to me and said, I used to perform on that stage 15 years ago, and I would love to kind of get in touch with the current key holder and see if he'd let you in and take some photos. So 2 weeks later, I turned up, met that key holder and his son, who spoke amazing English. He let us in and take those photos. And my main aim, I suppose, these days is to always go in and not be so greedy, I suppose. Go in, take the contact details, take the names and email addresses, give them the photos afterwards, and then make that connection. Whereas I used to just suppose go in, take my photos, leave and put them in my portfolio, and that would be that. Whereas I suppose over the years I've kind of progressed into kind of this bigger picture. And nowadays having that connection, that contact, helps me then of course bring people back, or return myself with friends and whatever I want to do at a later date. So this particular one, beautiful. Their aim here is all they want to do is sort out that ceiling above the stage and replace that stage, the wood on the top of the stage. And we're talking like a few $1,000s, which if we get things back to normal, I'll be very quick to be able to produce that and do it for them and protect the heritage of this space. I mentioned also as well about finding unique spaces and finding unique locations, and I also mentioned a bit about the kind of really ancient buildings that are dotting around the landscape. Now, the one here on the left-hand side is a monastery. It's actually an Armenian monastery, but it's right on the border of Armenia and in Georgia. So actually on this photo, there's a drone shot on the right-hand side of it, 7 meters behind, literally 7 meters behind the monastery is Armenia, and on the left side is Georgia. It's a space that locals don't know about. Very, very locals do, but within Georgia as a whole, no one knows where it is. It's one that took me ages to work out. I was kind of randomly searching through Google Maps last year, when we were all bored, and found this location, got in the 4x4, drove down to the location, and it was quite the adventure. Kind of go off this road It was gravel for a while. Eventually I hit kind of like, got muddier, it got bumpier, it got kind of a little bit more random. And eventually I kind of kept going through it, following the track that Google was telling me, up to the point where I thought, well, there's just a bit of field left. And I'm talking literally a field. I kind of entered that space, and then within seconds, like the military, the border police basically came up in another 4x4, don't know where they appeared from, came up beside me and was like, what are you doing here? You're right near a border. You need to be careful here. What are you doing? Have you got permission? And I didn't know this was going to happen. So it turns out I got on the phone and the guy spoke perfect English. He basically said, look, you need a permit to enter here. You're okay today, but when you come back, you need to get yourself a permit and you need to apply for that permit. And then you can come back. We'll give you a permit for 3, 4, 5 months, whatever it is. But today you're okay. It turned out I wasn't okay. I actually went into the space. The guards followed me all the way up. They followed me to the monastery. I started photographing it, filming it. I was doing a YouTube video at the time. And I was doing this whole thing. And I thought, this is strange. They literally won't leave me alone. Like, they're right beside me the whole time. And I thought, they're going to be bored because I'm going to be here for hours. And 2 hours nearly went by. And then they told me to hurry up and get on my way. And I said, look, I was waiting for sunset. I was waiting for the sun to drop. And I didn't know that actually it was going to be an awful sunset. But I was waiting for the sun to drop. And I went back up to the car. I was explaining this story to them, and I put all my stuff in the boot. And my boot on my 4x4 swings, you know, so it swung open. I put my stuff in it, including my keys for the 4x4. And then the border guard came up, starts chatting to me, asking like when I want to come back, how far I've got to go to drive back to Tbilisi, this kind of thing, you know, whereabouts I live in Tbilisi. And he was doing it all via Translate, and he leant on the door of the boot and it swung shut, closed, and locked my keys in my 4x4. So quite an incredible story. A few hours later, he has to smash the window with the stub of his gun to get my key, you know, break the window to get my keys out so that I could leave, and left in the pitch black. And that story, believe it or not, is all on my YouTube channel. So you should go check that out if you want to as well. But it just goes to show the kind of adventures that sometimes it needs to do the initial investigation of these places. But for me personally, it's more about once I then do that kind of, I suppose, let's call it the dangerous side, the side that's risky or weird and nobody knows the lay of the land. I do that in advance to then know that, you know, I need a permit. You get a permit, it's fine. You go down there, do what you like, and nobody follows you around and no one pesters you, and it's a lot easier. And that's basically what I did with this location. The one on the right, by the way, is just a heritage house. I believe it's 120 years old, this house, and it still sits abandoned in the middle of nowhere in the west of Georgia. Not much to see other than this fireplace. It's difficult to shoot. The light in there is quite awkward. Real nice paintings, hand paintings all over each of the entrance walls. A really unique space. So somebody mentioned earlier, I believe it was Deborah, was it Cecilia? I mentioned about gear. Well, we're now on to the gear section to wrap us up for this evening. Now, gear for me, I'm not exactly a gear guy. I'm now actually going to be changing my camera body for the first time in 6 years, nearly 7 years. I currently own a Canon 5DSR. Now, the reason why I own that camera is actually because I print a lot, as I talked about earlier. It was one of my main income streams, and it still is because of, you know, everything that's been going on. And I print in large resolution. My prints always start at 84 centimeters, and we're talking we go up to 180 centimeters. So very large format. That camera is absolutely perfect at it. It's really a tripod camera. Low ISOs. It's great in the low ISO range. And I am going to look to change it probably to an R5 in the coming weeks, actually. So it's going to be changed over. Mainly the reason why I'm going to keep to brand, I'm not really a brand guy, again, doesn't bother me. I do the investigation what's best for me, I suppose. And by keeping the R5, it means that I can keep my array of lenses, which we'll talk about in a second. The most important piece of kit, of course, is a tripod. I reckon 90% of my work on my website is shot on a tripod, and I combine that tripod with an L bracket on the camera. It's very important for me to have an L bracket. It keeps the weight of my camera through the center of my tripod, and I can flick it between landscape and portrait orientation with a flick of a wrist. and that's really important. Keeps the weight through uneven floors. If I'm shooting for commission projects, I want to make sure that I go into this space and it's not going to tipple over, my lens isn't going to break. I have insurance, but it's mainly about minimizing the kind of risk, I suppose, of this. Waterproof bags goes without saying, or need to protect the gear. You never know what sort of day you're going to walk into. And I find that I combine that L bracket and those legs, the tripod legs, with a geared head. For me, it's actually essential to have a geared head. This particular one, the GD3WH, just means geared drive three-way H. And this particular geared head is fantastic because actually, take that blue bracket out. That basically is an Arca Swiss plate. Get rid of that. We slide the L bracket in there. We go portrait, landscape. And what we do is we use the star drive to do quick movements, and we do the kind of the handle here to do precision geared increment movements. Now, I used to have an old ball head, and it was about, I don't know, it was about 800 grams, 850 grams. And the weight wasn't the problem. It's quite heavy, of course, nearly a kilo, but it wasn't the weight that was the problem. The problem I have for me personally in this kind of work is slippage. And when you want to change one part of your axes, you want to change your composition slightly, you unlock it, you unrelease the ball head, and all three flop around, all three axes are gone, and you've got to start again. This doesn't allow that. This allows separate axis movement, and it allows kind of like each gear to be locked in, and then you can kind of precisely kind of frame up your composition. So it's amazing in terms of kind of like locking things down, thinking about your composition, thinking about kind of slowing down, and thinking about kind of like how it's all going to work. It's great as well for me if someone, say for example, one of you guys was with me, we would kind of be talking, and I go back and my composition is thankfully not moved because the geared head doesn't allow it. In terms of actual gear lenses, of course, for architecture work and for the kind of stuff I shoot, I don't need f2.8. This is the 16-35. It's an L series, but it's an older lens, f4. That means it's not really a portrait lens per se, but it's great for what I do. Most apertures I shoot at are 7.1, but f9, sharpest point of the lens to get real detail into what I'm shooting. I love compressing a scene more, maybe going to 35mm every now and again, and this lens allows me to do that. In 2016, and the reason why I will always stay at the moment with Canon is because of two particular lenses. Now, I do shoot with tilt shift lenses nowadays. I initially shifted into them because I shot in kitchens and commercial work. And what I did was, when I sold all of my wedding kit years and years ago, I actually made the transition to buy some tilt shift lenses. I own the 17mm tilt shift, and I own the 24mm tilt shift by Canon. Beautiful lenses. Essentially, I'm not going to go into detail tonight at all about them. They are expensive. I would never tell anyone to go out and buy one of these lenses, but what I'm trying to say is they're specialist. I do let people use them on trips and tours. I also do explain how we use them. Again, we do that online. We talk about that stuff a lot, but in terms of, for me personally, the quick way of explaining it is they have a larger image circle than a traditional lens. So the shift element, forget tilt for tonight, the shift element allows you to select any part of that larger image circle to portray it onto your center of your camera, essentially. So I can use them shift lenses to reach ceilings if they're high, to pull them into my composition, to combine shots together across the frame and shift the lens and do, say, pano of 3 to pull them together to make a panoramic and increase my resolution, tenfold. I can also do it to make it kind of unique compositions, lower my tripod, pull in some of the foreground interest. And the problem is, some of the times I go into these spaces, the foreground is quite bland or boring. There might not be like a room full of stuff, so it might be tiles or some overgrowth or something there, and I need to pull in some foreground interest, and I do that by using the shift element of the lens. Something that if you're interested, we talk about at another time. This is the reason why I started doing these kind of trips, and not just to show the kind of beauty, but also the technical elements of photography as well. One of the most overlooked pieces of equipment, as we're getting close to wrapping up this evening, portrait photographers use them all the time, polarizer filters. They are so often overlooked in architecture photography. And you might ask, well, why are these important? Well, they're important in architecture work and city sort of work, really, to get glare off glass, tiles, off of, like, say you've got a piece of artwork on the wall and it's getting some horrible glare through a window. The polarizer filter helps, and a very good one can also help with horrible purple fringing on windows or windowsills, or if you've got a dark environment and light outside, as I had a lot in Lebanon recently. These kind of helps you not eliminate it, but can help kind of, like, you move the polarizer and it can help cut that section out. So it's something to bear in mind as well. And yeah, this evening we're kind of running up to time now. So in terms of, like, us and what we're doing, I hope you've enjoyed everything that we've talked about. There's a lot to fit in with Georgia. It's an absolutely magnificent country. Lots of stuff that I've covered over the last 2.5, 3 years. And hopefully I've given you a little sample of some of it tonight. There is, of course, more of the kind of beautiful side, and I hope that I've shown you it's actually sometimes looking at beauty deeper within is part of kind of something that we can think about as well. In 2019, I actually ran 5 trips across the country, and I did 2 private ones as well, so 7 in total, and they were a great success. We ended up doing lots of stuff. It was kind of unusual. It's kind of very much the trial event at the start of the year, and by the end of the year it was kind of becoming the expert. I was looking forward to diving into this in 2020. I have postponed everything to 2022, and I'm going to talk about that briefly in a second. But for me, it was brilliant to do. They ended up being sold out quite far in advance. There's something that it was kind of a niche thing. It was also, I kind of looked at my market across Europe and realized that actually some of this stuff is brilliant. It's not being done, and it's something that I really was passionate about. So I thought it kind of made a good fit. Looking at local culture, there's one of my guests shooting those cable cars that I showed you earlier. We're also talking about, that's the Erasoni, the dance company that I mentioned briefly in the center of the talk when we're talking about Tbilisi. And we ended up kind of doing lots of varied stuff. The idea with these trips is actually to mix the adventure side, the kind of hidden, the beautiful spots that the locals know that tourists don't, with what I do. So, we try to pick out kind of some of the beautiful parts of the country. We go to those, we visit them, and we visit places that I would usually take guests, culture houses. We take them to beautiful hidden theatres, some that are closed, some that are hidden, some that are abandoned, whatever it is. And within the safe of, making sure that it's on a safety list, we kind of go and show you the kind of beauty, the untouched parts of the country. So very different and very unique what we're trying to do over in Georgia. Now, in terms of, like, what Click Trip are doing, we've actually decided I've actually going to put on a complete exclusive trip to Georgia through Click Trip, and I've given them something a bit, I've not done this before actually, so hopefully it goes quite well. I've actually given a discount code, and you can see it in the top hand right here, JK_CT10. That gives the first, actually gives anyone listening across this thing 10% off this price. It's actually going to be quite a big trip. It's going to be a 9-day trip. All the details are on the Click Trip website. I thank those guys very, very much for setting up this evening. It's great to be able to do these kind of talks, and it's the first time over lockdown I've done one over Facebook, so very new for me as well. In terms of this actual offer, we tried to come up with something that was workable. So this actual trip that I'm kind of offering is actually going to be in 2022. The dates are on there, so it's actually starting in 2022, but you've got until the 1st of October 2021 to kind of book, but you need to do that through the Click Trip website, and we're offering 10% off. I'm offering 10% off. It's coming out of my pocket. 10% off this autumn trip for 2022. Exclusive trip. You won't actually find it on my website. And the reason why it's different, the reason why it's unique to Click Trip, is actually I'm combining not just what I do, but there's also a gallery and a film lab in Tbilisi as well that I work with very regularly, and something that I'm working on, a personal project that we're going to announce at a later date. These 3 things are going to be combined, 4 things are going to be combined to bring the package together. And there's also going to be a session in here where I teach you how to edit for print. We're going to print your work as well at the end of the trip, and we're going to dispatch it back to your home as well. So the print price is included in here. And we also make sure that we include all of your transportation and accommodation, as you'll see in the Click Trip links. I think I've answered most questions as have come in this evening. Thank you very much for listening. I'm going to sign off nicely here now. And I thank very much as well the guys over at Camera World for hosting this, letting us do these talks. Thank you very much to Suzanne and the team at Click Trip for letting me come on here this evening and do the talk as well. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you guys. I think we're kind of wrapping up this evening. And I think we're pretty much going to sign off there. So thank you very much. If you've got any questions, I'll speak to you very, very soon. It's been really nice to talk to you and host you this evening. I hope the hour went quick for you. It certainly did for me. So I need to go and get a drink. And thank you very much. Like I said, thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for taking time. And I hope you guys really, really hope to come and see it. I just saw a question about what dates in 2022. Let me just have a quick look at this, because there is some questions in here that I need to just cover as well. What dates in 2022? I have sent these over. Give me a second. So I believe it's the 1st of the month. So it's the 1st of October 2022 is the start date. So for 9 days. It's the complete package. So it's everything that I actually offer as a whole. That's the main thing. So that's the dates. Have I missed any other questions? Let me just check. I wasn't on the sort of back end of this screen, so you have to bear with me on that. Very enjoyable. Thank you very much, Gary. All the nice comments, really great. So thanks, Gary. Cheers, Darren, for watching as well. The borders open us. Yeah, actually, talking about borders, Georgia's open. I'm actually just waiting now so Georgia's been open for a while. They allow people in with vaccines and PCR tests, but with a vaccine, no tests allowed. What we're waiting for is the UK to allow vaccinated people to go return to the UK without quarantining. And fingers crossed, that's happening in the next few days. And if it does, we're back up and running. So that would be absolutely magnificent for me and for everything we've been working towards. So hopefully that answers that question. Yeah, mentioned about the 2022 autumn dates. They're in the Click Trip link, so go and check those out. And also, what have we got here as well? We've also got Paul. Thanks for Paul for watching, listening. It's great that you stuck around. There's still quite a few of you on there. 1st to the 9th of October are the actual dates, Kim. So they're the dates that kind of we've set for the Click Trip special, really, and what we're trying to do with them. Nice to see. Yeah, we're going to Italy next week, so that's nice. So Max is a really great guy, so you'll enjoy talk with him next week as well. Thank you very much. I think I've covered absolutely everything. I'm going to roll right back to the beginning to make sure I've not missed any comments. Looks like I haven't. A good old Norfolk boy. Yeah, that's me. Cheers, Camera World. And that takes everything for this evening. Thank you very much. Take care, and yeah, see you all very, very soon. Bye-bye.